Hey everybody, I'm the Ranting Monkey, and today's video started as a Twitter argument. So the other day I'm on Twitter and I see this. Milo Yiannopoulos loses his home because of the hurricane. As you may imagine, many of the responses to this article were gleeful. They thought it was funny that this man lost his house. Now, we should note here that it's turned out it might not have been Milo's house. He may have been exaggerating or lying. While that's a shitty thing to do, it's neither here nor there for what I want to talk about. People were cheering because a man lost his fucking home. Why? Because they don't like his politics. On Twitter, I merely pointed out that this was asshole-ish behavior, which apparently is not the right thing to say to people who are cheering a man losing his home. One particular poster told me how ironic it was that he lost his house. When I asked, how the fuck is that ironic? I was greeted with global warming. Now I know this isn't going to do any good, but I want to preface this by saying I am not arguing about man-made global warming here. I'm really not. I'm going to address a specific argument that's really fucking stupid. I'd like to show you the tweets between me and this particular idiot, but he's since blocked me. So what I'm going to do is just jump to the end. After muting me, he comes back and shares a Thunderfoot video saying, haha, see, I was right. Well, we're going to dig into that Thunderfoot video just a little bit.
Can you really blow a hurricane? Of course, by blowing fans at it. Or can you really stop a hurricane by shooting at it? With the latter, at least one Florida sheriff advising against it. But in this video, I'll show you exactly how much it takes to stop a hurricane.
Yeah, we're not going to watch that part. This is a 23-minute video. Though he only talks about Milo for a few seconds, he names it, Denies Hurricane, House Destroyed. We'll talk about that title again later. For now, we're going to focus on three things. Rush Limbaugh, Milo Yiannopoulos, and the frequency of hurricanes. If you want to watch the whole thing, it is linked below.
So Hurricane Irma, not only the most powerful hurricane in recorded history, it's also spawned some of the most powerful levels of stupidity. Like Rush Limbaugh saying that hurricanes are fake news.
But is that what Rush really said? You wouldn't be lying about that, would you? You wouldn't be fake news here. No, not you. You're a scientist. You do really good research. What's that at the bottom of your screen? Why, that's a link to a Snopes article about this very thing. Let's see what they say. Question. Did right-wing talk show host Rush Limbaugh call Irma a liberal hoax and then quietly evacuate Florida himself? No! As the Washington Post reported in an article critical of Limbaugh, the talk show host accused the news media of exaggerating weather-related dangers, but did not suggest Hurricane Irma itself was a hoax. Okay, so you didn't use the word hoax, so maybe Rush actually said fake news. Well, let's take a look at PolitiFact. They're certainly not a fan of Limbaugh, but at least they go through the trouble of quoting what he actually said. Now, I'm not going to read it all here. It's linked below if you want to read it. But basically what Snopes said is absolutely true. Rush was suggesting people are using the hurricane to advance a climate change agenda. Incidentally, you're going to do that here in a moment. But first, let's get to Milo.
And he can probably be considered lucky in that another climate change denier, Milo Yiannopoulos.
No, I don't believe in man-made climate change at all. But
you don't?
No.
You don't believe in it?
No, I don't think it's. I don't think we're affecting the climate significantly. No.
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 So all those scientists, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
If you take him at his word, which usually you have to do with a pinch of salt, claims that his house has been destroyed by Hurricane Irma.
That is some really deep analysis. I'm not going to lie, when I saw the name of your video and then how little you actually talked about Milo, I laughed my ass off. If you meant it as a joke, well played. Now, the argument I had on Twitter was over whether or not hurricanes are affected by global warming. That's what this video was supposed to be absolute proof of. So we're going to dig in a little bit deeper and see what this mumble-mouth motherfucker has to say.
Climate scientists have proven to us that they are quite effective at predicting the polar opposite of what is actually going on. In a 2007 forecast report by the IPCC, they predicted that we would see more hurricanes and typhoons that were more intense with heavier wind speeds and larger peaks.
The strongest Atlantic Ocean hurricane ever recorded.
The people conducting research whose very job is predicated on the idea that climate change is an imminent threat.
In Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, all threatened by the most powerful Atlantic hurricane ever seen.
For the headlines regarding Irma, unprecedented power. We've had 185-mile-per-hour winds now for 24 hours. That has never happened before in recorded history.
Well, you certainly showed them. The most powerful in recorded history? Man, we've been recording history for thousands of years. Obviously, this means something major's going on, right? Well, not exactly. It wasn't until the 1940s we really began to be able to even measure hurricanes. This happened with the rise of the hurricane hunters, planes that would fly into hurricanes and take measurements. Before that, everything we knew about hurricanes were based on ships that happened to be passing by and land measurements once they hit. It wasn't until the 1960s that we got our first weather satellite. It wasn't until the end of the 60s that we had a satellite that stayed in orbit. The first weather satellite was only in the air for a couple of months. So when we're talking about recorded history, we're talking about less than 100 years of being able to see what was actually going on.
They predicted that we would see more hurricanes and typhoons that were more intense with heavier wind speeds and larger peaks.
And he actually said that there was all that buzz going on, remember, before this storm happened, about it could be a Cat 6. Well, if you actually do the math, technically it would be categorized as a Category 6 hurricane if there was such a thing.
Climate scientists have proven to us that they are quite effective at predicting the polar opposite of what is actually going on.
Hurricane Katrina was $100 billion estimated, Sandy 60 billion. And when you look at the amount of water damage, you look at the area covered, and you look at the aftermath.
Yet 2013 was the quietest hurricane season in recorded history.
That are going to last for weeks and months. But the extent of the damage, 52 inches of rain, the record rainfall, highest rain from a storm ever in the continental United States.
The money they're talking about early on won't come close to addressing what they're dealing with, right?
Phil does a lot of this before he moves on to hottest years on record, how hurricanes are formed, and then eventually how you would stop a hurricane. Oddly, though, he never actually digs into the history of hurricanes. He shows clips of weathermen saying, biggest storm on recorded history. He shows clips of damage and rainwater. He never talks about what's happened in the past. And there's a reason for that. Because if he did, he would show what a fucking idiot he is on this subject. Whether or not you believe in man-made global warming, there is absolutely zero evidence showing hurricanes have been affected by it. Let's start with damage. The most devastating hurricane in history hit Galveston, Texas in 1900. It's estimated between 6,000 and 12,000 people died. So many people died, they ran out of places to bury them, so they started burying them at sea. Problem was the bodies started washing up. They set up pyres to burn the bodies on the beach. And there were people whose full-time job was to burn dead bodies. They wandered around looking for dead people. It was such a fucked up job, they were actually issued alcohol to deal with it. And this happened long before the 1-degree rise in Atlantic Ocean temperature that Thunderfoot later tells us is why we have such horrible storms now. We didn't have Doppler radar to see how big this storm was. What we do know is that when it hit, it was a Category 4. Wind speeds were about 130 miles an hour when it first hit. We don't have more accurate readings than that because the device used to measure it was blown off a fucking building. But sure, Thunderfoot, it's all just global warming. Not intense enough for you? What about the 1932 Cuban hurricane? This hurricane had sustained winds of 175 miles an hour. Sure, it's not the 185 measured at Irma, but it also wasn't measured with modern day techniques. And we sure as fuck don't have satellite pictures to tell us how big it was. So far we've seen hurricanes haven't got significantly worse in damage or intensity. What about frequency? Now some of you may be upset that I used Wikipedia for a source here. I also included a link to the National Hurricane Center where you can go check all of this data. Let's start with the 1870s. A time when there were no satellites, there were no weather hunting planes. In the 1870s, there were 55 recorded hurricanes. These are hurricanes that were recorded because ships ran into them or they made landfall. If you jump ahead to the 2000s, we had 72 recorded hurricanes. That's a difference of 17. Again, obviously there must be a problem, right? Well, maybe. In 1960, there were 68 recorded hurricanes, only 4 less than the 2000s. By then, the Atlantic had already started heating, right? Well, not according to this graph from the EPA. The ocean temperature of the 1960s was about the same as the ocean temperature of the 1880s. Why do I mention the 1880s? Because in that decade, there were 64 recorded hurricanes. Only 4 less than the 1960s, and only 8 less than the 2000s, the busiest decade on record. And again, this is all seen just with the human eye. The 1800s didn't have our modern ways of tracking storms. Thunderfoot, what you did here is incredibly dishonest, especially for a man who calls himself a scientist. If you believe in man-made global warming, you're doing them a disservice with this bullshit. In fact, you're proving Rush Limbaugh right. Rather than talking about the actual history of hurricanes, data you could have easily looked up, you instead play clips of weathermen telling us that this is the worst storm on record. Then you start talking about how the Earth has warmed up. Okay, well, if the Earth is warmed up, then these storms should be significantly bigger and there should be more of them. That's what we were told. But that's not what the evidence actually shows. The evidence you fucking ignored. If you guys want to argue about climate change, we can do that at another time. But for right now, anytime you hear some idiot telling you there's a link between climate change and hurricanes, ask them for the proof. They will talk about everything except what we actually know about hurricanes.
And you have voted. And we voted, and it was really startling. You're watching these hurricanes now, and it's hard, especially while promoting this movie, not to feel Mother Nature's rage.
That's where you are, Thunderfoot. Your argument is just as good as Jennifer Lawrence. Your argument might as well have been voting for Trump causes hurricanes, because it has as much scientific backing as your fucking argument. You both proved Rush Limbaugh right, that you're using hurricanes to cause fear in people to push a climate change agenda. And fuck you for making me agree with Rush Limbaugh. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this one. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and please share if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I'm the Ranting Monkey, and I'll see you next time.
And you have voted. And we voted, and it was really startling. You're watching these hurricanes now, and it's hard, especially while promoting this movie, not to feel Mother Nature's rage.
Your life makes me sad.